I want to talk about the nuclear family. This is the only way we now know to raise children. A nuclear family consists of traditionally a mother, a father, and one or more children. People of the same sex, two mothers, two fathers, but it's still the same thing. It's one or two adults taking care of 1 to 3 children. And this is what we consider standard. This is the way we've all been, many of us have grown up. This is what we consider standard. There's going to be a mom and a dad and some kids. This isn't necessarily the only way you can arrange a family, however. It's the only way we've really known for the past few centuries. But back in our hunter-gatherer age, before agriculture, when people lived in tribes, you would have had more of a communal child rearing. In a tribal culture, you can pool your resources, pool your child care resources so that some of the mothers can go out and hunt for food. So some of the mothers stay home and can take care of a lot of children. That would be tribal child rearing, where you're gathered together in a community, maybe a kinship community, where you all share your resources. So this nuclear family is a relatively new form of structure. Now we consider it normal. And unfortunately, it's not doing the job. The nuclear family is not, number one, it's not producing enough children because this system of child rearing is extraordinarily expensive. It's expensive in money and it's expensive in adult resources. So in a nuclear family of a mother, a father, and 2 children, we have a very low child-to-parent ratio. In other words, you have in a 2 adult, 2 child family, you have a ratio of 1 child for every adult. And you've got an adult who may be highly trained in nuclear physics or some other skill, and he or she is spending all of his time teaching basic skills to an infant. So you're talking baby talk to an infant, so that infant learns language skills, you're changing diapers, you're feeding the child. Most of these activities don't really contribute much to the child's upbringing. They're just kind of housekeeping activities. And in a nuclear family, you're locked into this low child ratio, which wouldn't exist, say, in a very large family. Back a century ago, large families were common. You would have 6, 8, 10 children in a family. And that sounds like hell today. That sounds like impossible today. Who can afford 10 children? And who can afford even the vehicle to transport the 10 children in? But there's a certain efficiency of scale, a certain economy of scale in having a large family, in that you can work out systems to get things done. And most importantly, you can have the older children take care of the younger children. So you don't need a PhD candidate to talk baby talk to a baby, to teach basic language skills. An 8-year-old, a 10-year-old can do that. And a 10-year-old does that naturally. When a new baby comes into the family, the 10-year-old is hovering over the baby as a parent just as much as the biological parents are. What a large family does is it takes advantage of that captive labor force of all these other older children who can care for the younger children who can make this family unit more efficient. So the more children you have, in theory, the more efficient, the fewer adult resources you need per child, and the more efficient the whole operation is. There was a book from the 1960s or so called Cheaper by the Dozen, about a family that had a dozen children and how they managed things. And we can never imagine having that kind of family today, but from a purely practical standpoint, it's a very efficient way to raise a lot of children. The nuclear family that we have today, if you can think of any, I have no children myself, but if you think of anybody who has children, they are a couple with 1, 2, in rare cases 3 children. You rarely encounter people nowadays who have a whole lot of children. So you have this very inefficient structure, but it's also not clear that it's healthy for the children either. If you grow up in this environment where you get 100% of your parents' attention at all times, where one parent is entirely focused on you, that seems like a good thing at first, except that eventually you have to grow up, and eventually you have to deal with the outside world where you have to share things with others. And as an only child, or even a child in a two-child family, you may not build up these skills of sharing and build up these skills of knowing how to fit in a group, because you have been the focus of 1 or 2 parents' sole attention. And you see this in the extreme when people become wealthy. When parents become wealthy, what do? Well, traditionally, when parents became wealthy, they would have more children. So if you were a count or countess or a sheik, you would have a lot of children, as many children as you could afford, because that was your insurance policy that enough children would survive to succeed you and to provide for you in your old age. But nowadays, when parents become wealthy, they don't have more children. Instead, they devote more attention to the children that they have. So that their 2 or 3 children become little princes and princesses, where we're going to buy them anything that they want. They each have their own room. They have all their own possessions. And if you have the money, you're going to buy a compound to keep them in. You're going to buy an estate, which is a single-family home surrounded by a lot of land. When they come of driving age, you're going to buy them a car. So when parents become wealthy, they devote more and more attention, more and more resources to their children, which is ultimately crippling those children for life, because eventually they're going to have to stand on their own, and eventually they're going to have to learn to live in a world where they have to share with others, where they are not the center of attention. So what a nuclear family is doing is it's breeding narcissism. The more resources are available to the parents, the more narcissistic the children become, because they're getting more and more resources without having to work for them. In contrast to a large and moderately impoverished family, like you can imagine in the early 20th century, a family of 8 children where there isn't much food, there isn't much entertainment. You have to negotiate with your siblings. You have to figure out how to share things, because there aren't a lot of things to share. You have to figure out how to share clothes and figure out how to negotiate with others to get what you want, as opposed to just having what you want given to you, which is what the modern nuclear family seems focused on. So how do we bring back the large family? Well, it's not really possible within our current economic structure, because raising children has become so expensive. There are many things that you have to do. Basically, children just popped out of the oven and you took care of them in earlier centuries. Now there are all sorts of rules and regulations and standards you have to uphold. You have to buy them things so that they're not embarrassed when they go to school. You have to buy them the right clothes and things. There's governmental expense. You've got to have the right car seats for them. You've got to have the right vehicle to carry children. The standard vehicle now can't possibly carry more than 2 or 3 children. It's become so expensive that a large family just isn't practical for most people. It's extremely rare to have a large family. Yet we need large families if we're going to get out of the hole that we've dug for ourselves of not enough children to support our society, not enough children to maintain our workforce. if the standard is 1 child per couple, which is what it is essentially in America and China, you have an average of 1 child per couple, that whole society is going to collapse because each generation divides by half. You have 4 grandparents, which produce 2 parents, which produce 1 child. In a few generations, your whole society is going to vanish. So society desperately needs more children, and the most efficient way to do that is to create big families. And within our current structure, that just isn't possible. Looking ahead to some future structure, after everything, the economy has collapsed, after things have gone to hell, and people realize what desperate situation society is in, we may bring back the tribal family. The family where a community pools its resources to take care of children in relatively large numbers, and where children themselves provide the labor force for taking care of younger children. So in future videos, I'm going to talk about what this modern tribal family might look like. In the past, it was just a kinship group. It was just all your cousins and uncles and aunts would gather together in a tribe. And in the future, it's probably not going to be quite like that. There'll be different kinds of tribes organized along different lines apart from kinship. But we'll talk about that in the future. What I want to emphasize now is just how inefficient the nuclear family is and how it is not serving our needs. It is creating spoiled children, and it is not creating enough children to sustain our population. So ultimately, it's not going to work. If you stick with a nuclear family, we're all going to be lost because civilization just cannot maintain its numbers anymore because it's just too expensive. Okay, I'm turning off the main camera and turning off, where's the GoPro? There's the GoPro. Turning off the GoPro